Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we have the truth about Christopher Columbus and his detestable deeds. Also, we'll have some of the latest discussions on the two-state solution for the Palestinians and Israelis, and also black gold, also known as oil. Could this be the reason that the U.S. is in the Middle East? Well, these stories and more, but first, some are cheering, some are protesting. Just hours before President-elect Donald Trump was sworn in as the 45th United States President, thousands of protesters were turning out in Washington, D.C. to protest his presidency. Now, there were many clashes between police and demonstrators who were chanting things like, "No Donald Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA." Now, some were seen setting trash cans on fire, while others pulled up plants along the streets. Several businesses had their windows smashed with bricks and rocks used by the protesters.
Oh boy, that's horrible. Well, there were even some attacks against pro-Trump supporters who had been attending the pre-inauguration party. Witnesses reported police were using tear gas and pepper spray on demonstrators who were throwing balloons and other objects filled with water at them. By the end of the day, 217 people were arrested and 6 police officers had received minor injuries.
Well, all of this exposes one huge issue. The U.S. is deeply divided over the recent election. Looking back throughout the course of the campaign, we can see just how deeply divided the nation is. If we look at a map, the division becomes clear. Clinton supporters form large groups along Southern California on the West Coast and New York City along the East Coast. Now, ironically, most of the mainstream media is based in these areas. Places like Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, all favoring Clinton.
Interesting. Well, the media and other political establishments helped to create the division by not backing Trump. From politicians to celebrities, many were calling Donald Trump a fraud. Journalists even laughed at the fact that he could be the Republican Party nominee for 2016.
Well, people in neighboring West Virginia also voiced their dislike for Trump, chanting, "Not my president." In Weirton, West Virginia, the concerns for the working class is apparent throughout the country, and people are divided on Trump's promise to make America great again. Now, in order for him to do so, he is going to have to deal with a lot of hatred aimed directly at him.
Big pill to swallow.
That's right.
Well, Jack Ma, the second wealthiest man in China, worth $28.2 billion, according to Forbes, says America's own business and financial moves have hurt Americans, not foreign entities like his Alibaba enterprise. Well, let's look and listen to what he has to say at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is a town in the Swiss Alps, last week.
Past 30 years, the American had 13 wars, spending $14.2 trillion. The money going there. What if they spend a part of that money on building up the infrastructure, helping the white collars and blue collars? No matter how strategy good it is, you're supposed to spend money on your own people. When I was young, I heard America is bad. Ford and Boeing, those big manufacturing companies. Last 10, 20 years, I heard about is Silicon Valley and Wall Street. The money go to the Wall Street. And what happened? Year 2008. The financial crisis wiped out $19.2 trillion USA alone. They wiped out all the white collars and destroyed 34 million jobs globally. So what if the money is not Wall Street? What if the money spent on the Middle East, Middle West of the United States? developing the industry there. That could be changed a lot. So it's not the other countries steal jobs from you guys. It is your strategy.
Okay,
but you do not distribute the money and things in a proper way.
Katan, Jack Ma is right that $14.2 trillion spent on war could have been spent a lot better.
That's right.
There have been a growing trend over the past few years in various American cities. No longer are they celebrating Columbus Day, the second Monday in October. Now they are honoring all people native to the Americas before Christopher Columbus arrived. The day is known as Indigenous Peoples Day, and among those involved is Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their goal is to raise awareness of the contributions made by the different cultures native to the lands that Columbus supposedly discovered.
Yeah. Well, if you have attended a U.S. public school or been taught from any American history book, the quaint story of Christopher Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492 is familiar to you. But the reality of Columbus being the first to find the Americas couldn't be further from the truth. There were actually hundreds of millions of native people living in what we call North and South America upon his arrival. Well, thanks to archaeological finds, we also know explorers from other continents, including Europe, and they actually had traveled to the Americas many, many years before Columbus.
So reasoning that you can't discover a land that is already inhabited, Columbus's discovery of the Americas really wasn't a discovery at all. And his goal wasn't to find new lands anyways, but to find wealth in the form of gold. However, Christopher Columbus didn't find gold in the form he had hoped, but he soon realized he could turn the indigenous people he did find into gold by selling them. That's right, Katan, Columbus was a slave trader of the worst kind.
Well, you don't really see that in the history books of
Not
today's schools. Interesting. Well, the island of Hispaniola, which today we know as the Dominican Republic, and Haiti were Columbus' first discovered the people he would turn into gold, the Taino people. Writing back to the Spanish monarchs who funded his voyage at the time, Columbus described these people, he said they were well built. With good bodies and handsome features, he said. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants, he said.
Continuing, he wrote, with 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. Here there are so many of these slaves, although they are living things, they are as good as gold. Well, further writings of Christopher Columbus's own crew members describe the bold explorer as a man who raped, pillaged, enslaved, and slaughtered people for a profit. Now, some have described him as the ISIS of his day, justifying his atrocities in the name of religion.
Interesting. Well, Columbus actually began what we know today as the global child sex slave trade, shipping young children to all corners of the globe. In another letter, he bragged about this to a friend, writing, 100 castellanos, which is a Spanish coin, are easily obtained for a woman as for a farm. And it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 years old are now in demand.
Well, aside from abducting men, women, and children from the islands, Columbus permitted his crew and the Spaniards who came to inhabit the island to take as many of the native people as they wanted and could use them however their lustful minds desired. Oftentimes, women and children would be taken from their families, raped, and forced into hard labor.
Well, 25 years after Columbus had arrived on Hispaniola, the Spanish missionary Pedro Cordoba explained how the Taino people were desperate for relief from Columbus's tyranny, he wrote.
He wrote, as a result of the suffering and hard labor they endured, the Indians chose to commit suicide. Occasionally, 100 have committed mass suicide. The women, exhausted by labor, have shunned conception and childbirth. Many, when pregnant, have taken something to abort and have aborted. Others, after delivery, have killed their children with their own hands so as not to leave them in such oppressive slavery.
Wow. Eventually, Columbus resorted to wiping out the Taino people altogether, living only 55 years, Columbus was, and dying as a result of sexually transmitted diseases. Columbus's brutality was merely the beginning. For several centuries afterwards, many European empires continued to enslave and slaughter the indigenous people of the Americas as they colonized the New World. Knowing the role Columbus played, Jeff, is absurd that anyone would ever honor him with his own holiday that is actually still celebrated to this day.
Right. The truth is a whole lot different than the cute story they teach you in school.
That's for sure.
Well, as horrific as that history is, there are events equally as horrifying still taking place today. We have Larry McGee looking into the heartbreaking crisis in Yemen, as well as the latest on the airstrikes in Libya. Larry, has anything changed in Yemen lately?
The deplorable circumstances in Yemen are sadly becoming worse, stemming from the ongoing war in that nation between mercenaries and the country's government. Shocking images pouring in from the crisis defy description as hospitals struggle to deal with millions of malnourished children. Doctors say that number is ever increasing, accompanied by a sharp spike in the country's poverty rate. Citizens of the war-torn nation communicate their despair with tears, expressing their hope that a higher power is somehow aware of their plight and at some point will intervene. World leaders are calling the crisis one of the world's worst famines, with some citizens having to resort to eating leaves in desperation. One of the biggest complaints coming from observers is the role being played by Saudi Arabia, who has backed the Yemeni government in its resistance against mercenaries. There are some who are accusing the oil titan and its coalition partner of war crimes and criticizing both the U.S. and UK for failing to suspend arms sales to coalition members. Human Rights Watch representative Christine Berkeley says the biggest cause of civilian casualties from the beginning of the war have been the Saudi-led coalition's airstrikes that have repeatedly hit markets, homes, hospitals, and schools. In the midst of all of this, Ms. Berkeley says that the U.S., who is reported to be the largest arms seller to Saudi Arabia, is in Yemen helping to refuel jets and otherwise assist the Saudis' campaign. The arms deals are said to have totaled $20 billion in sales in 2015, but the outgoing administration of President Obama has pledged to roll back assistance following the coalition's bombing of a funeral in Sana'a, which reportedly killed hundreds. Activists, however, are calling for a complete cessation of sales to the Saudis until civilian attacks are stopped and investigations are conducted concerning those that are reported to have occurred. The occurrence of U.S. airstrikes in Libya against two alleged ISIS training camps are grabbing attention as the true motive for the U.S. and its allies in the nation is being called into question. While the official motive is for humanitarian purposes, analysts say the actual objective is oil. The intervention is believed to have been sparked in truth by the intentions of the country's late leader, Muammar Gaddafi, to challenge the petrodollar with a new form of currency. The gold dinar, which the late Libyan head was working to implement, was being touted as being a true sharing of the wealth. Dr. James Thring of the Ministry of Peace and Legal Action Against War says such actions are one of those things that almost have to be planned in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you are going to be targeted. The late leader is said to have organized two conferences on the proposal in 1996 and the year 2000, both of which are said to have been well received by many African nations, including many in Africa. Gaddafi is said to have urged African and Islamic nations to unite behind the currency all the way up until the end and to sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. That move would have directly undermined the world's current economic status quo and shifted the standard of wealth among nations back to gold as opposed to the U.S. dollar. founder of the Daily Bell, Anthony Wiley, says that if Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling on the global market and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcome by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. And according to Wiley, that would certainly cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth to remove him from power. The same failed attempt to oppose and change the current system was reportedly attempted by Saddam Hussein also, who suffered sanctions and an invasion after announcing his intentions to trade Iraqi oil for euros instead of dollars. It is believed that the U.S. then acted to prevent a ripple effect amongst OPEC members who might have all then considered transferring their oil trading also away from the petrodollar. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Good time, Jeff. Back to you.
Well, it's amazing the effort that people will go to protect the almighty dollar, as they call it. Well, diplomats from 70 countries came together in Paris to confirm their support for a two-state solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The initiative was launched by the French president last year in an effort to relaunch talks. Hollande stated that the solution that all agreed to appears to be threatened as he addressed those in attendance.
Although no Israeli or Palestinian representatives were at the meeting, pro-Israeli protesters showed their opposition to the gathering. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, declined an invitation to the Paris meeting, citing that only direct talks between the two parties can resolve the conflict. He said in an interview, "The conference convening today in Paris is a futile conference. It was coordinated between the French and the Palestinians. I must say that this conference is one of the last twitches of the world of yesterday. Tomorrow will look different, and that tomorrow is very close."
Well, Palestinian President Advisor Hassoum Zomlat said, "Today, we Palestinians have finally convinced major quarters of the world that peace will only prevail should the international community, should the world intervene."
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the summit, and the French foreign minister said a two-state solution is the only possible way to ensure peace in the region. French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault said, "It is not time to give up because the urgency remains. The two sides remain very distant in a relationship of distrust, which is particularly dangerous. No one is safe from violence erupting again. Our common responsibility is to, from now on, succeed in bringing Israelis and Palestinians to the negotiating table."
Well, violence and settlement building are two of the matters that are seen to be eroding the two-state solution. Although the Israelis and Palestinians are not at the conference, French President Francois Hollande had invited both sides to be briefed after the conference on the outcome of what was discussed and decided. Netanyahu has declined to come, but Abbas has said that he would come to Paris in the coming weeks.
Mitchell Barak, a former political analyst for the former Israeli president Shimon Peres, said that a declaration of countries that doesn't include the two countries that need to be partners in this conference, the Israelis and the Palestinians, is a stillborn from the beginning. It doesn't matter what comes out of this at this point because it's predetermined anyways, he said.
Interesting. Mustafa Barghouti with the Palestinian National Initiative said, "We have to remember that the Oslo Agreement was concluded more than 23 years ago. And according to that agreement, both sides had to finish negotiating all final status issues, and a Palestinian state should have been established after 6 years in 1999. Well, we've already passed that date by 17 years.
He continued, Mr. Netanyahu was invited for peace talks in Moscow, and he rejected that. Mr. Abbas was invited to Paris, and Mr. Abbas accepted, and Mr. Netanyahu refused to come. That's why both sides are not there. Mr. Netanyahu was even invited by the Egyptian president, and he refused to go. So in reality, we're we're seeing is an Israeli government that wants to only wants one thing, more time to finish the process of killing that possibility of peace.
Well, Mr. Brock stated in response to Mr. Barghouti, there's something wrong with the priorities of both the United Nations that has to slam through on New Year's Eve weekend on something to condemn the Israeli settlements, and 70 nations getting together in Paris. Well, he said, you'd think to rebuild Syria or Aleppo. There are people who are dying there today because they have no electricity. Now, I'm not saying that's an excuse for the Israelis, and I don't want to divert the attention there.
He continued, but I do want to say that if the world community is serious about regional peace, about human rights in the region, then you know what maybe they should spend is a few minutes on Syria there. He concluded by stating how he watched the incoming Secretary of State for the U.S., Rex Tillerson, stating regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not enough to say that you're against terror, you have to prevent it.
And I think if we would use the efforts now of a peace conference for both sides together and say, hey, we really need to discuss what's going on before the region explodes. Well, he said that would be a good use of time and effort and people's energy in the region. Yeah.
And lastly, outgoing President Barack Obama warned incoming President-elect Donald Trump on any sudden unilateral moves on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He said in a press conference, I think my views are clear. We'll see how the approach plays itself out. I don't want to project today what could end up happening, but obviously it's a volatile situation. And what we've seen in the past is that when sudden unilateral moves are made that speak to some of the core issues and sensitivities of either side, that could be explosive.
Interesting. Well, you're absolutely right, Mr. President. Explosive indeed is the situation for all nations who have become angry following a system that has proven for thousands of years that it cannot bring peace. But there is a work that is bringing forth a system in this generation that teaches not only peace, but ensures joy and abundant living for all mankind. Yeshua Hawkins and the House of Yahweh is given the task of bringing peace to all nations, but don't take our word for it. Your Holy Scriptures actually foretold this thousands of years ago. To find out more about these wonderful prophecies, contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494 or visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. For any emails, you can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, please call the number on your screen. And once again, we'd like to draw your attention to the Yisrael Says program. You can go to www.yisraelsays.com for the greatest Bible study tool on the market today, the Yisrael Says program.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yeshua Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.